So now we're on the morning TV talk show portion of our segment this evening. This is very Swedish, by the way, that we would be standing up at tables. I just need to point that out. This feels not at all like the Oprah-like set that I was promised when I agreed to come here tonight. So now is our chance to kind of integrate all these ideas together. And I think that the presentations were evocative and provocative, and they caused in me as many questions as answers. And so I have some questions. We are also joined up here by Paul de Roos, who I have to say thank you so much for following the conversations that have been happening online, and you will be simultaneously reporting in as well as monitoring. So if for you guys, if you see that Paul is on his computer, he's not playing Minecraft or Angry Birds. He's actually helping our friends out there in cyberspace. And you'll be okay. Anybody else want to have anything else that they need to get done while we're here? Fold some laundry? Okay.
Questions on Twitter, please, as well.
Questions on Twitter, and you can also, using the hashtag PPP2014, or you can follow along on the live stream. Okay, so I have a couple of questions to get the ball rolling, and then we're going to open the floor up, and we're also going to ask some questions from online. But I just thought I'd kick us off and to warm us up. And I think that the question that I had first was for both Peter and Marjan as professionals. So as a patient doing this work, and patient engagement and patient activation and patient participation, there's so much talk about skills that patients need to learn in order to be able to partner in their own care. But it's been my experience that it's a two-sided equation, and that there might be some skills or ideas that providers and professionals, researchers need to learn about as well. And I wondered if you had any thoughts to if you agree, if you think that you needed to learn something different than your training might have provided you with, and what you think that professionals might need to learn to really be able to engage in this work authentically.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do agree.
With which part?
That it works both ways, and there are things that healthcare professionals also need to learn to make this work the best possible way. And thinking back on my own basic training and so on, having that as sort of a referral point, I'd say that one needs to most of all sort of not viewing yourself necessarily as the person who presumably knows best in all occasions, but listening and trying to liaise and build up a partnership so that way you may be able to move forward faster and better, hopefully. So I think that's something regardless of the professional background, I think that is something that we are lacking in generally are lacking in our basic training, the communication skills and so on.
Okay, I can add some interesting observations from our own country. Asking a question, what matters to you as a person? It's a very good starting question, I think, in every conversation between a doctor, a physician, and a patient. So communication is key. When interviewing neurologists about how they dealt with patients that were thinking about an advanced treatment option, they also said, well, you know, I know there are 3 options available, but I'm familiar with one, so I discuss only this single option as a treatment. So that was a message that also neurologists don't know everything. So they admitted that they actually had lacked knowledge, just lacked the information about all treatment options. So it's communication, but it's also knowledge, still knowledge, and attitude. It starts with the willingness to have your patient as a partner at the table. So I think we more or less agree how to solve this. It's the next step. It starts with education, but you have to sustain the skills that you learn during your education. And once you enter the clinic, we often see that young doctors suddenly lose their skills they learned. So it's also role modeling. So you showed the picture of from God to guide. I think this is role modeling, and that's also very strong. But it should be on the work floor in the clinic.
So I have just following up on what you just said, some grassroots question that is popping up. Gene Burns asked it in a variant. I also had a specifically directed in Jon. So to Jon. So the question from the web was, how can we, as person with Parkinson's disease, get individually engaged in a movement like Parkinson's movement, and how to do it in Montreal? And Gene Burns asks, what is your recommendation to increase our participation on a local level? What strategy should we use, no matter where we're from? Anybody wants to head off?
If I take that one, since I think the first part at least was pointed towards me. In terms of engagement with Parkinson's movement, I mean, well, first, obviously, at a simple level, obviously go on the website and just take a look and see whether it's something that you wish to be involved with. Patient engagement, patient advocacy is not for everyone, it has to be said. It's people tend to assume that it's almost a duty of patients, and I think that's a mistake. I think patient advocacy and patient engagement is very much a personal journey, and it occurs when people are ready for it. I certainly didn't even think of doing anything beyond wallowing in misery for about the first 2 years. So I think one has to approach it on one's own terms. In terms of what one can do at a local level, I mean, there are a great many things that one can do at a local level, from essentially individual acts, as it were, to visiting individual people with Parkinson's, anything that helps to make the personal lives of individual patients better. Maybe organising to take people on an outing, things like that. I mean, these are modest and minor examples, but they're still worth doing, I think, at the local level. I think taking it beyond that point, obviously there are other advocacy groups out there, and others who are interested in patient participation.
Patients and providers right now are just still very far apart. And the second thing that came to mind for me was an experience that I had as a parent. My children, or actually all of our family, was receiving primary care through a hospital system called the Cambridge Health Alliance in Boston, and it's a teaching hospital for Harvard Medical School. And one of the really innovative things that I thought that they were doing was that their third-year medical students, rather than being sent on rotation, were actually given a panel of patients to follow for 1 year. And they followed these patients through thick and thin, regardless of what medical issues came up. And really, I think about a day that I got to take a third-year medical student with me to Boston Children's Hospital to follow along with me and my son through an echocardiogram, an EEG, a height and weight check, through an echocardiology appointment. We then went to the geneticist. he then had his eyes dilated for an eye exam. He then had blood drawn, and then we went for lunch, and then we had an endocrinology appointment. And we did this so that I didn't have to miss a lot of work, and my son, more importantly, didn't need to miss a lot of school. And to watch this doctor, this future doctor, sort of experience what it was like for us in just the course of a regular day. And I think it was as much to go through it as for him to realize what it took to get that day to line up to look like that. I think it changed him. I mean, I can't say, but I think those are the kinds of experiences. We just need to really walk in each other's shoes. And I think that patients are doing that more and more now as we're engaging in improvement teams. We're in the offices, we're trying to understand the realities of the clinics, and as well, professionals are really trying to, through focus groups, through different kinds of service design methodologies, really understand the reality of patients. So I think that's the first really critical key, is that we just have to get better at listening to each other.
And your story made me think of a concept I heard about a year ago, the burden of treatment. It was coined by, among others, Victor Montori, who is an endocrinologist at the Mayo Clinic in the US. So the burden of treatment is the amount of treatment, sort of the work a patient has to do to be as well as possible. And if the burden of treatment turns too high, the patient won't do the treatment. And to that concept also is added something called minimally disruptive medicine. So I like both those concepts because they sort of put all the rest of medicine on its head.
Sure does.
And brings another perspective I think is very attractive.
So do you have more questions for us?
Well, I'd like to follow up also with web questions on what Sara just said. So minimally disruptive. How do you see self-measurement in that context? And to follow up in that, there's people that are interested in apps you use and concrete recommendations on what are useful and friendly apps to use on even different devices. We got lots of specific questions. And what's already on your platform connected?
Take a live question.
Yeah. Okay, so about minimally disruptive medicine and self-monitoring. Well, self-monitoring can be disruptive, and that's why I tend to now favor things that capture data actively. That means that I can be passive. So I use, for instance, a activity measure, an activity tracker that I have on my arm that's also waterproof, and I can shower with it and everything. So it can show me how active, how many steps I've taken, and how my sleep has been, both in amount and quality. So it both tells me the number of hours and also how much deep sleep I've had. So I tend to sort of move away more from the more invasive things, more disruptive things like the tapping test myself. But it's also good for, I find it helpful to have sort of a baseline to start with, to know where my tapping results performance usually is to have to compare with. The apps, what's currently on our platform was a question as well. Mm-hmm. So we can post those on, we can post those on the BAGADILICO website. We'll post a link up to that. Yeah. Was there another question now?
No,
okay.
I think this is fine.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna hear from some of the folks who are here with us in Lund.
It's on.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Sara.
Okay.
First, I have to admit that was a bit late. I parked my car too far away, and I got caught in a cargo lift before I found the personal elevator. So I missed your first part, and I hope that my question was not answered during that part. Okay. Self-participation or self-engagement, of course, is very important in Parkinson's, obviously. And for us patients to really get motivated to participate in such self-monitoring, it would be interesting to know how beneficial that is in comparison with other diseases like, I don't know what, cardiac diseases, diabetes, and so forth, where they maybe have done such participation more for more years than it has been done in Parkinson's disease.
Okay, so I first want to mention that a reason that I became so participating in my own care and creating on my health is that my neurologist was interested. Not that he actively supported, but he didn't discourage me from doing it either. So that was a key thing, that he was actually not discouraging me from doing it. So I actually started exploring it more. In terms of comparing with other diseases, I think that diabetes, if I'm sort of a bit blunt, they have it easy. I mean, it's easy to measure their outcomes.
Oh, that will cause.
I know.
A lot of comments.
Yeah, I know. That's I know I was blunt, but it's easy to measure glucose levels. We have a bit more challenging task in measuring our own values, and that's and I think that diabetes, they have been handed over their responsibility in more early, because healthcare simply didn't have the resources to deal with all their measurements. So they've sort of been given the control and the power over their own health, because due to lack of resources in healthcare. If you sort of draw it if you make it an easy question like yes or no. But that doesn't mean that we cannot do what we can as well, what we want to as well. But we need to explore it in a different way, I think. In terms of cardiac disease, I mean that's also a challenging thing to measure in a home environment. But there are more and more consumer products coming out now that actually anybody can check their ECG and everything. So technology is sort of catching up with self-care in a way.
Anyone else in the audience have a question for any of our guests?
Is that on?
Yeah, so you said many times that information and social media is really key issues. So of course, when you go to internet, for example, and look for information about various disorders and diseases, you end up with information of very different quality. How can you address this, and can you help patients in some way to find, let's say, the good quality information?
That's such a good question. It sounds almost as though I could have asked it myself and set it up, but it's not the case. We are actually setting up a project specifically this year, which we call EdPark, which is something that Parkinson's Movement is going to run, which is exactly that. It's an assessment of the resources available to patients on given subjects. So we would pick a subject, say sleep, for the sake of argument, and pick out what we think is the best literature on that, and that will be assessed by a panel of patients, very definitely. And the idea is that we'll produce not quite an approved reading list. That's too prescriptive. But those resources that we think are particularly good, we'll flag up and operate on probably some kind of star system to say, here are the ones that we think you should read, because this is explained in the right language. It's scientifically credible, and we think is worth your attention. And we'll be doing that subject by subject starting in about 2 months' time.
Thank you.
A comment to that, and that's very good and well if your English is good enough, and I mean most of the sort of US and UK are very good at English, but Swedish patients probably couldn't, and a lot of other patients in the world probably couldn't use that information unless it was translated. So just for the Swedish patients, I want to mention that I know that SBU, I don't even remember what the sort of abbreviation stands for, but they are discussing setting up a national health library of information, primarily for physicians, but in the second instance also for patients, so that you can keep a lookout on that. As for myself, I think that for me that information wouldn't be coming out fast enough for me to be able to wait. So I would probably go for English, but that's underway in Sweden. So keep a lookout for that.
I guess that's kind of a follow-up to the question about language for all of you, and on any level. Is there any risk in these higher expectations for patient participation that there will be certain groups of patients who will be really left behind? Is there any concern that some of these developments are excluding certain kinds of people with certain skills or lack of skills? And what do you think, I mean, I'd be particularly interested to hear from you, Jon, about that. I know that Sweden and the Netherlands are fairly homogenous countries, but to hear about places where populations have a lot of diversity, and how do you ensure that you're not just directing your message to a very narrow kind of patient?
I think that it's worth giving a straight, honest answer. I think it's a distinct possibility that we may be. I don't think it'd be nice to say, yes, we have provisions in place to make sure that everyone who wants to hear the message will receive it in whatever form, and that we'll produce paper versions of documentation and so forth. That's simply, in the first instance, resource-based, and it's not something we have the resources to do at the beginning. That's not to say that we're not aware of it, and that it's not a consideration we'd like to address down the road. But I have to be honest and say that for the time being, that we run that risk. The fact that the thing is internet operated, the fact that we've talked about social media, presumes, of course, at the simplest level, that people will be using computers. That in itself is a restriction. The fact that many of you came here because you saw an advertisement probably on the internet means that, of course, that the audience here is perhaps not representative as well. That I think is always a concern with anything that uses a medium which is not universally available.
Well, what's going on online? There's a lot of things happening there. Oh, did you have a comment on this? Sure.
Yeah, short comment. Well, patient participation comes in various forms, various colors and tastes. So I think once acknowledging this, it can be informing patients is a form of participation. Asking patients for feedback after how they experience care, it's patient participation. It's not always an empowered e-patient that is taking a lead. So I think, of course, you have different forms of participation, but once having this picture, many patients will be able to participate in their own way. So, yeah.
I want to quote someone you mentioned earlier, Cristin Lind, when the man who created the self-dialysis together with the nurse Britt-Marie Bank in Jönköping here in Sweden. He was asked by an 80-year-old lady who was going to start hemodialysis at the clinic, "So, Cristin, do you think I can do this self-dialysis?" So Cristin said to her, "Everybody doesn't have to do everything, but everybody can do something."
Thank you.
One question for Marjan Faber was, can you tell us a little bit more about the demographics of ParkinsonNet? Like what professions are represented, who is in there, and maybe even numbers. Like, is there a large amount of neurologists in there, large amount of physios? The persons from the web were wondering a little bit more to understand, because in some countries they have very few neurologists. So just to have an understanding whether it could work somewhere else.
And I have a part B of that question, which is, what role have patients played in the facilitation or the organization of ParkinsonNet? So not just in their own care, but in the organization itself.
Well, actually the numbers, the first part A, is a difficult one. The large majority of the participants, of the members, are physical therapists, for sure. At this annual meeting, where 1,400 members are joining, the vast majority, like 700 physical therapists? I'm not sure. I have to look up.
I'm sure that they're tweeting it for you right now.
Yes, please. Please, Lonneke. Yeah, so probably part B is easier.
Okay.
Yeah? If that is okay. Probably our website will show the exact numbers.
I'm sure ParkinsonNet will tweet it and use the hashtag PPP 2014.
All right. But maybe that will answer the question. In that
Yes,
way.
I hope so. Yeah. So patient involvement in ParkinsonNet development, as I explained to you, the first years, they were not involved. It was very focused on the professionals to have this expertise in place. I explained that guidelines are very important. So what we did, for example, is have patients access to patient versions of guidelines. So in order to have them engaged and have them aware of the added value of an expert. So especially in informing patients, there has been an emphasis on that. Now we're making steps forward and thinking about innovations. We are actually currently setting up a patient panel. I think it's completed already, to have a patient panel providing us with feedback on our innovations and have them engaged in the process of designing these and setting priorities. So we did a lot of work of engaging professionals, I have to admit, but now things are turning totally different, probably totally different. So now patients are more also part of the development teams. Yeah. So that's a good development, but it's recent.
We really look forward to the follow-up from you in the future to hear about how that's shaping not only the work but the questions, and the interventions. So, I just want to check going once, do we have a last question from folks here in Lund? Then we will leave the final question to folks online. And Paul, thank you for curating.
The last question was for you. It was about registries and will the individual patient benefit? Because there's in the world lots of initiatives going on to start registries and they want to use patient data. And one of the questions was specifically the well-developed Roma registries where you're so close. How will that benefit the individual patient, or is there a benefit?
Well, we didn't come here to talk about rheumatology, but I think that what is really interesting to me as a patient watching something like the RA registry here in Sweden is that when I first learned about it, this whole idea that patients from home can enter data, about patient-reported outcome measures. We don't know for sure that it's measuring things that patients care about. Actually, we know that it's not measuring all of the things that patients care about. Through some design work that's being done recently, we know now that patients want to be able to enter data about things that matter to them, about their everyday life. But when I really first came across it, this idea of patients entering data, the data is being used in the clinical moment so that I don't have to use my office visit to do a 20-minute recap of everything that's happened to me since the last time that I was here. We can use this data to make decisions, and then we can use the data also to drive research. I see it as a skeleton, as a framework or a scaffolding that's really going to allow us to operationalize this kind of partnership. And I think that it's, Jon, you ended by saying you hope that this 3.0 was going to be the last version of your organization to come out. We're not even close to starting. I think that that's what's so exciting with this, is that unfortunately we could come back every year and you can have a 4.0 and a 5.0 and a 6.0. I think that we don't really even understand how much this kind of partnership is going to revolutionize health and healthcare. And so I don't think we can even put our finger on any examples of where it's done. It's all moving target and it's all progress. And so I welcome systems that let it become operationalized, as well as organizations that let us figure these things out together.
I have one important closing question. There's many people asking about where can they find later on the presentations and the videos. Is there a web place that we need to refer them to, a place they can find later on?
I think we can say that Jens will post them on the BAGADILICO site.
BAGADILICO site?
But also the links to the actual presentations, the paper as the actual files. People are also asking for the presentations themselves. So we can post them on the BAGADILICO somewhere. Yeah, BAGADILICO.
Okay, I just want to close then the online part of the session, but with writing down the exact address of the link so they can monitor the website for later on. But I'll contact you for that before I tune out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you for being here tonight and participating tonight, live, online, and thank you for participating in health and in healthcare. Thank you for letting me participate here as well, and really on behalf of all health seekers, thank you very much to BAGADILICO for this wonderful opportunity. So we'll stick around to answer any questions that you might have. The conversation can definitely continue online, but be well and good night.